Welcome back to the program. Today we are joined again by Professor Richard Wolff to discuss Trump's politics and how also the Europeans are adjusting. So thank you as always for coming back on.
Glad to be here, Glenn.
So you recently published an article about what you define as Trump's politics and the decline of U.S. capitalism. Now, after we've seen now a full year of his second term, what do you think? How would you, I guess, conceptualize or explain what you think Trump is trying to achieve here?
Well, I think I am perhaps mellowing. I don't know if that's the right word, a little bit. I see better than I think I saw before where he's coming from, what it is he's trying to do. And I suspect, if you allow me a moment of self-introspection, that his growing isolation, his growing difficulties, the growing opposition to him here in the United States, which is happening faster than I thought it would, even though for most of last year I thought it was taking longer than I thought it would. So I think all of that is shaping me as follows. More than I understood before, what he is doing is really very traditional Republican Party politics in the United States. In other words, his difference from the conventional Republicans is very marginal, is very particular, is focused on a very specific aspect. It's not a wholesale rejection. It's not a wholesale departure. None of that. So what do I mean? The first priority of the Republican Party has always been and is with Mr. Trump to make money for the top 1 to 5% of our people. The corporate executives, the employer class, which the U.S. Census says is 3% of our people, which includes self-employed people, by the way. That's what this party is based on. That's who staffs all the upper echelons of the party, and that's what its priority has been, to serve them. So to give you an illustration, the first piece of legislation that was the real focus of Mr. Trump during his first term as a president was one of the largest tax cuts in American history, the one that was passed in December of 2017. Enormous cuts for corporations, enormous cuts for wealthier individuals. When you go to his second term, it's exactly the same. The first priority was what he came to call his big, beautiful, his words, big, beautiful tax bill of last April, more or less. So that's his first thing. Before he goes into his persecution of immigrants, before he goes into his tariff stuff in a major way, he takes care of his core constituency. I mean, I can talk now, and that's an achievement. The audience in the United States that people like me have, I'm not alone, is greater than it has ever been in my lifetime. I can talk about a decline of the American empire. I used to have to explain it in great detail with lots of statistics. I don't have to do that anymore. Those statistics are now fairly well known, even by people who don't say a word the way I do about that. So we are still in a state of decline as a nation. And what that means is the decline continues because basically nothing is done to stop it. So, for example, the fact that for 30 years, the People's Republic of China grows at 2 to 3 times the percentage increase of GDP per year than the United States simply continues. Even in 2025, when growth rates around the world were lower than they have been, still China got its 5%, and we're fooling around at 2%, 2.25%. It's exactly what we have, more or less had all along. The successes of the Chinese simply continue. During the last year, just to give you 1 or 2 statistics, during the last year, because of the tariffs imposed on China, China was able to export to the United States $200 or $300 billion, if I have my numbers right, less than the year before. There was a serious drop in Chinese exports to the United States. But it didn't matter because China exported more to the rest of the world than it lost in selling to the United States, so that at the end of 2025, China was able to announce over $1 trillion in net exports. I mean, it's an extraordinary performance, but it is a screaming demonstration that whatever little leverage Mr. Trump thought he had by hitting China with a tariff didn't work. Really was a failure. And the same is true whether he interferes with oil going from Venezuela to China, which it looks like he's going to do, or all of the other jumping on the tankers. It's way too little and it's way too late. And so he's in a problem that whatever he does isn't addressing the actual issue, nor is there any discussion that can make that clear. This is a veneer over what he is doing. And let me explain it in a different way. To be blunt, what Mr. Trump's international game is to at least slow, since you can't admit it, but to at least slow the decline of the United States by using whatever power it still has by virtue of having been the hegemon for a century and being large and being obviously an important market for exporters around the world, a certain important source of capital and all the rest, to use it to convert as much as possible of the rest of the world into a tributary state. Really, the model you ought to use is ancient Rome, when all of the parts of Europe had to deliver a certain number of bushels of corn or wheat or chickens or animals. It's all tribute. Von der Leyen has to come and give tribute. We're going to buy your natural gas. We're going to invest in your country, our money. It's an extraordinary tribute economy. And it is done by brute threat. If you don't do this, we are going to hurt you. Even though the tariff is paid either by the American company importing or the foreign company's subsidiary, which will damage its profitability here, or the prices will be raised to the consumer. But any way you cut it, this is costly for the American economy, which is why traditionally Republican parties didn't do taxes. This one does it, but he has to do it both for home consumption and for foreign consumption by telling an Andrew Jackson story. In other words, if you read what Mr. Trump actually says, the whole world is cheating us. He is rising up. All right, if you're a little country, if you're a corner of the big British Empire, if you're dealing with colossal economies like France or Britain back in the early 19th century, okay, you can tell such a story. It has a plausibility. But you can't do that now. Now you are the colossus. You can't. I mean, the story that the United States has been cheated by everybody, every country, large and small, and that instead of the United States being so inordinately rich that it can buy everything from the rest of the world while getting the rest of the world to put its savings here so we can buy everything from them, and to turn that into we were cheated. I mean, only in a country with the media as docile and as craven as ours is could even imagine pulling that stunt off. But here it works. It works because it gives a plausibility to what is otherwise very ugly. For example, when I give talks and I explain what I said before, this is a tribute. We are becoming a society that says, you must give us tribute or else we will hurt you. And I do it with humor. I point to, in this country, the story of criminals have an incredible fascination. We endless movies about criminals and endless books. It's just the people are fascinated with crooks. And one of the most standard images in countless films and books is the following. Imagine a small store, a dry cleaning store, a laundry store, a little restaurant. And in the front door come two gentlemen dressed in trench coats with bulges under their jackets, suggesting they have guns. And they come up to who's ever in charge and they say, we're here and we want you to understand we need our payment for your protection. To which the proprietor then says, what do I need protection for? Who's threatening me? And the two gentlemen smile and they answer, we are. And if you don't pay us, we'll burn the place down. And then in a sequence 2 minutes later in the movie, they burn the place down because he has, or beat him up or whatever it is they're going to do. The joke is, we're protecting you from us. Well, the United States is doing that. It's recognizable here. And when I use the metaphor, they get it, and my audience laughs with me. They see it. But within 30 seconds, it's out of their mind. They much prefer the story of, and when I ask them, tell me, how is it cheating? It's ridiculous. The fact that you have a deficit with one country and a surplus with another tells you how this system works. It has nothing to do with blaming one of the, what are you doing? They don't have any answer to me. They don't know international trade theory enough to explain any of it anyway. That means that because of the tribute they have to pay, and because of the lack of a growth dynamic that they can do, the high tech is not under their control. The Americans and the Chinese dominate in all the high tech areas. The Europeans will no longer be able to produce automobile, anything. I mean, they will be secondary or nothing in the world of production of most goods and most services. What this means is they're going to have to preside, these leaders that are in power now, which I would say in general are centrist or center-rightist in most cases. I understand the socialist one in Portugal and all of that, but you know what I mean. It's center-right kind of government. Now, here's what I think they are going to be doing. Whether they understand this or not clear to me. They don't talk like this, but whether they don't see it, that's another matter. So they're in for shrinkage. They are going to be a declining empire like the United States, but without the compensating phenomena that at least slow the process here. It's more accelerated there and will become more so in the years ahead. What that means is that they are at real risk of social disintegration. Why? Because when an empire declines, whether it is the outer reaches of it that can no longer feed it, the fact that the Europeans don't have an empire anymore is not feeding them. There is, Holland doesn't have Indonesia, Britain doesn't have the empire, the French don't have Africa, all the rest of it. And not just the political independence, but the real economic independence, which wasn't possible until now, because the Chinese are there, because there really is a non-European alternative to relate to. So they're going to shrink. They're not going to be able to offset it. And when an empire declines and can't stop it or slow it, a certain kind of terror sets in. And it's a terror both in the ruling class, the people who, during the empire, were able to accumulate extraordinary wealth and extraordinary power. They are in the best position when the empire declines to hold on. But the problem is, if you are successful in holding on, and I would argue that the upper class in Europe still is successful in holding on, it means you're going to have to offload the costs of a declining empire on your middle and lower classes. In Europe, what that means is you have to destroy your social welfare state. You're going to how else are you going? You're either going to have to tax the mass of people, or you're going to have to take away the spending on their health care, on their housing subsidies, on their child care, on all the things that Europe in a way became famous for, either starting with Bismarck in Germany and then all the other parts of Europe that at various points did all this. You're not going to be able to afford that. You're not going to want to tax your own people because they're the ones with the power and the wealth that they don't want to give up. And they're the politicians. They've bought the politicians. They've done that long ago. And so now Mr. Merz has to give speeches telling the German people, we can't afford, it's not a Wirtschaftswunder. It's a Wirtschaft that's going into the toilet. So you got your problem. How is this going to be managed? And now the darkness is going to get darker. How are you going to manage this? You have a pretty strong socialist history. You have pretty strong anti-capitalist political parties. You have a pretty strong socialist cultural base that values these social welfare policies. You are not going to be able to take those away easily. My family is French, and they're not particularly political. But you start taking away, my family is going to go into the streets in France. And I mean that. And not just the young ones, the older ones too. So here's what I see. I see a growing split in European societies. And I want to make it stark. It's a split between the working class and the ruling class. Very classic split that Europe has had before. It's going to get much worse. And the only way that the people in charge could get away with sustaining their own well-being in a declining empire is if they have two things. Number one, an external threat that allows them to deploy nationalism as an ideological program rather than class conflict between the mass of people losing their social welfare and the ruling class. But ideology alone won't be enough. You also need a military. You need a police and a military apparatus much bigger and much stronger than what you have now. Therefore, the ideal solution that solves both those problems is to make a demon out of Russia, and one that requires you to militarily build up in a hurry, because that'll give you the military to repress your own people. I'm going to go a little farther than I should, but I want people to understand the point. This militarization has nothing to do with Russia. Russia can't take over the rest of Europe, would be crazy to undertake such a project, makes no sense. They don't need it. I mean, I noticed even yesterday the Estonian intelligence department in Estonia issued a document that Russia is not the danger that people think it is. I don't know what happened. Maybe something changed in Estonia, but in Estonia, the idea is gone. For me, I understand this as an American. And why? Because you're replicating American history. The Great Depression in the United States produced in this country a lurch of the working class to the left. The workers in America joined unions the way they never had before. They joined two socialist and one communist party, and the unions and the communists and the socialists all worked together. And you mobilized, and you had a President Roosevelt who had to accommodate, because he wouldn't have been president if he didn't. What happened at the end of World War II was the business community was beside itself. The way that the communists and socialists and the labor movement handled the Great Depression was to punish the ruling class. If you look at all the statistics, inequality in this country dropped like a stone. They were taxed. They were forced borrowing from them. The market was thrown away, and rationing was substituted. World War II. You really whacked the ruling class. And what did you do? You established social welfare. That's when Social Security, our general old age pension system, in the middle of a depression, we passed Social Security. We passed unemployment compensation. We passed a federal jobs program that employed 15 million unemployed people, and on and on and on. And it was so horrible for the ruling class, here we go now, that when the war was over, 1945, Roosevelt dies, the war is over. The business community says, we have got to undo all of that. That, by the way, that program was called the New Deal, Roosevelt framework, the New Deal. We have to undo the New Deal. How did they do it? By the following: demonizing the Soviet Union and mobilizing a perpetual defense industry. that would keep the United States better armed than the whole rest of the world. What Dwight Eisenhower, the last traditional Republican, said we should not do is what they all did. They produced a military which could control the American empire and serve as the foreign danger that would justify a nationalism to erase all of the socialism that had become important. That's what we did. That's what you're going to do in Europe. You're going to do it. That's why the fact that Russia is now not a communist country, that seamlessly we went from demonizing Russia because it was communist to now demonizing Russia every bit as much, minus the communism was never the issue. The issue was we need domestically to have that enemy, to use nationalism as the rationale for the military, which we need to use against our own people. Why? Because we're about to take away from them what the last century of struggle by them got for them. And they are going to be very dangerous for us. We're going to face serious upheaval. But Mr. Merz wants to be sure that you have an enormously enlarged, Wehrmacht, so that you can deal, not with the Russians, deal with your own people. That's your problem. Of course, underneath them, and this I know it's true for Germany, and I know it's true for France, there are many members of the ruling class who are eager to make deals with China, who do not see their future with the West. They see their future there. They want to be able to buy cheap Russian oil and gas again. Absolutely. And they don't hide that. So somebody's talking to the people. They know they're not strong enough yet because the political class comes out of the American alliance and dependent on it. Their careers were built by that. They have made countless compromises as they went up the ladder to become prime minister. All those compromises were playing the game of the Anglo-American dominance.
播报新闻是我的日常，必须时刻保持妆容和皮肤的最佳状态。当来到人生中最重要的时刻，也是 KS 逆时奇迹帮助我轻松驾驭，闪闪发光。KS 逆时奇迹活肤露全效精华、精华霜，多达5种 EGF 6大冻龄关键成分，保湿效果让我非常满意，小细纹也不再困扰我。我就是我自己的最佳女主角 ，KS 让我从容自信，光彩动人。我是我人生中的大女主，我的最爱我做主。KS 逆时奇迹系列热卖中，下单请上快点购，透过中天新闻网 App 下单立减50，或输入 CTI 推荐码有额外折扣。